just like to start by welcoming you all to today's session and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting today. Today's session will focus on how rehabilitation of mined land is regulated by the New South Wales Government, and we will then hear from Glencore's Liddell Coal about some of the practical aspects of mine rehabilitation, including the work that they've done on their site recently. Before we get into the content, I just wanted to quickly go over some of the housekeeping for today's session. So this session is being recorded, and we ask that you stay on mute to avoid disrupting our presenters. If you don't wish to be recorded, please turn your camera off. The recording from today's webinar is going to be uploaded onto the Dialogues website after this session. There will be time for questions at the end of the session, so please raise your hand at the end of the session and I'll come around to people with questions. If you don't want to raise your hand, you can also enter questions into the chat and we can ask them for you. So I just want to provide a little bit of context for today's presentation and as to why the Dialogue is hosting this webinar. So when the Dialogue commenced in 2012, there was increasing community concern about a lack of information about rehabilitation works being undertaken at mine sites. So based on this feedback, we established a reporting project to track this information and provide it in a clear and accessible format to the community. So it's called our annual rehabilitation reporting project, and it reports on the total rehab and disturbance data for all the mining operations in the Upper Hunter each year. And this is a bit of an example of some of the data that we report on each year, and this just shows you the amount of mine land that's under rehab since we commenced this reporting project in 2012. Our most recent data is the 2024 results, which are available on our website. And you can see some of the key findings from this year were that there were 749 hectares of land newly rehabilitated, bringing the total amount of land under rehabilitation to just over 15,000 hectares. And as at the end of 2024, about 35% of all the land disturbed by mining in the Upper Hunter is now under rehabilitation. And since this project commenced in 2012, the amount of mine land under rehabilitation has increased by 71%. In the webinar today, we're going to hear from a number of experts in this field. Firstly, we're going to hear from Matthew Newton from the Resources Regulator. Now, Matthew is the Principal Inspector, Environment and Rehabilitation Operations with the New South Wales Resources Regulator. Matt has over 30 years of experience in environmental assessment and management across New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria and WA, and also in the USA. Since joining the New South Wales Resources Regulator in 2013, Matt has led several reforms, such as the operational rehabilitation reforms, which commenced in 2022. We will then hear from Sean Piggott and Paul Amity from Glencore, who are both working on the Liddell Coal Closure Project. Sean is the Environment and Community Manager at the Liddell Coal Closure Project. Sean has 13 years of experience across all phases of the mining cycle, from approvals and construction of new mines, operation and mine closure. Sean has been with the Liddell team for the past 3 years, leading the planning and execution of the closure project. And we're also joined by Paul Amity, who is the Rehabilitation and Closure Superintendent at Glencore Coal Assets Australia. And Paul brings over 25 years of experience in mine rehabilitation, closure planning and post-mining land use. Before I do hand over to Matt, though, I would like to just quickly pass to Megan McCool from the New South Wales Resources Regulator, who is the Chief Regulatory Officer. So just to provide a bit of an introduction before Matt's presentation. So I'll hand over to you, Megan.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. So yeah, Matt reports to me from the strategy and programs area, and we also have the compliance and investigations area as well. So I've come across from Safe Work after 20 years, been here since May. And obviously we've got quite a big portfolio of work to deliver over the next 12 months, and we'll be engaging obviously with industry throughout that process. So I'll hand over to Matt to start his presentation, but thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go, James. Can you see my screen okay?
It is. Yeah, it is. Yes, got that.
Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. Just before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands in which we work today and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this meeting. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you today from Wonnarua country. So topic today is really giving everybody an understanding in terms of how we regulate mine rehabilitation across New South Wales. So quick introduction into the New South Wales Resources Regulator. We belong as part of the Department of Planning, Department of Regional, Department of Region. What's that, Megan? I can't remember that one now. So it's a
Regional Development.
Regional Development, thank you. And we sit underneath New South Wales Resources. So within New South Wales Resources, we are quite closely aligned to Assessments and Systems, who administer the title instrument. So when a mine gets development consent, they then get a title under the Mining Act, and that is issued by Assessments and Systems. So we work quite closely with Assessments and Systems, along with our policy group and the newly emerged Future Jobs and Investment Authority, who is really looking at facilitating post-mining land use as mining comes to a close into the future. The primary focus of the New South Wales Resources Regulator, essentially, we have two key arms of that. So I'm within the Mining Act Inspectorate. So we look at compliance with the Mining Act, principally around mine rehabilitation, but also exploration activities as well. And we also have our Mine Safety Inspectorate, who look at regulating the safety and health performance of New South Wales and mines and petroleum sites. The New South Wales Resource Regulator was designed to ensure a consistent and responsive regulatory approach and provide increased transparency and community confidence. So what is rehabilitation? So if we look at a very base definition under the Mining Act, rehabilitation means the treatment or management of disturbed land or water for the purpose of establishing a safe and stable environment. A reasonably vague definition. So one of the benefits of now the new Schedule 8A under the mining regulation, which came into effect in 2021, subject to transitional arrangements, really enables us to provide a better definition in terms of what rehabilitation means at any given mine site. And that's through the approval of what we call rehabilitation outcome documents, which I'll touch on in a second. But in practice, mine rehab covers a number of disciplines. So if you talk to my wife, she thinks I just plant trees. Mine rehab covers a variety of disciplines. So that's from geotechnical, geochemical, surface and groundwater, subsidence, contamination, demolition, building retention, waste encapsulation, ecological, agricultural heritage. So a number of disciplines there. And essentially what we do is really set the benchmarks for what must be achieved in those disciplines in order for rehabilitation to be deemed successful at any given mine site. And that's what we approve through our rehab outcome documents. So that sets the measurable benchmarks at what needs to be achieved. And if they're achieved, essentially we're saying that rehabilitation is essentially stable and sustainable in the long term for any mining operation. So the role of the Mining Act Inspectorate, we now have a pretty strong role up front as part of any approval process through the Department of Planning. We provide a lot of advice to planning in regards to rehabilitation design. Our goal here is to really engineer any risks to rehabilitation. So if you have a look at the Hunter Valley and how that's evolved over the last 10, 15 years, pleasing to see there's a big change in mine landform design to more of a geomorphic, natural looking landscape. And that's certainly something that we really push hard as part of that planning process. So really providing that advice up front. And then when a mine gets a title, we regulate compliance in the mining sector with a key focus on achieving those sustainable rehab outcome documents. And as a last resort, we also hold and determine the amount of security that must be held at any given mine site. So our policy is that we hold 100% of 100% of the cost to rehabilitate a mine should a company unlikely go into administration or default on its obligations. We hold that money just in case. We have a strong regulatory framework in place. When you look back at how it's evolved, when a mining company is issued a development consent, that's when the actual post-mining land use is set as part of that process. So traditionally in the Hunter Valley, it generally comes down to whether it's a native ecosystem or an agricultural ecosystem. And more recently, as companies are starting to come to the end of their life, they're thinking about other alternatives as well. And that will need to be decided through a development consent process. But as part of a consent, they will set what that needs to be achieved from a rehab perspective. And then we regulate rehab activities against the conditions of a mining lease. Now, Schedule 8A is part of a mining regulation, and that sets out all of the conditions that needs to be applied to a mining operation. So essentially, it belongs as part of a condition on a title. And a mining operator, they must lodge a security deposit that covers the full cost of rehab in the event of default. And we assess that on an annual basis now. With the implementation of Schedule 8A conditions, generally what this means is that there's a range of conditions that are now placed upon mining companies. The key ones that are implemented includes the preventing or minimising harm to the environment, rehabilitate land as soon as reasonably practical after disturbance occurs. Now that will be different for every mining operation depending on the mine design. And that's something that is the focus out now of our inspection programs. Undertake a rehabilitation risk assessment and implement measures to eliminate, minimise or mitigate risks to achieving the final land use. That is the foundational piece for the reforms is risk-based approach. So when you look at a rehabilitation management plan on a company's website, essentially it's developed based on their rehabilitation risk assessment so that they understand what risks are in front of them that they need to overcome in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. We also approve the final land uses as that's consistent with the development consent. And really it's setting those very definitive benchmarks that once that's reached, we know that final land use and the consent has been achieved. And that's through 3 key documents. So a rehabilitation objective statement, a rehab completion criteria statement, and a final landform and rehabilitation plan. And I'll show you when I open up the Mine Rehab portal in terms of what that looks like. Under the new reforms, we're really pushing transparency so everybody understand what's happening at a mine site. And one of the key things there is the requirement for mining companies to publish their rehabilitation management plan on their website. And that's required to continually evolve and be updated and available to the community. They also must prepare an annual rehab report, which describes the progress of rehab over the annual reporting period. And again, that is something that's published on their website as well. And they need to prepare a forward program, which includes the schedule of mining and rehabilitation activities for the next 3 years, really demonstrating how they're going to achieve rehabilitation as soon as reasonably practicable. So now that they're submitting that every year, you're getting a rolling 3-yearly forecast about where that mine is heading into the future, both from a mine disturbance, but also rehabilitation in behind that mine disturbance. And a big change with the Schedule A implementation is a requirement to keep and maintain rehabilitation records. And that does essentially 2 things. That enables companies to demonstrate how they're complying with their rehabilitation obligations, but it also enables knowledge retention at a mine site. So when we go out to a mine site and we see a patch of ground that either is struggling from a rehab perspective or is actually looking really, really good, we can actually go back and say, well, what did you do here? Why has that been successful or why has that failed? And this is the importance of maintaining those records so that people who were involved in that process a number of years ago, if they move on, what they did has been documented. Importantly, we define 2 key sectors of a mine, and that's a large mine or a small mine. And a large mine is any mine that has an environment protection license under the Protection and Environment Operations Act, administered by the Environment Protection Authority. Any mine in the Hunter Valley is a large mine. And the key difference between a large and small mine is that a large mine needs to submit all of their data spatially through to us as well, so we can understand what's happening on the ground. Small mines, Again, Schedule 8A applies to them, but they're a lot more bespoke in terms of the nature and scale of their operation. At the moment, and this fluctuates a little bit, the government holds approximately $4.2 billion in security deposits. And they vary in terms of the amount for each site. So Mount Arthur is our big one. That's around about 460 million we hold for that site. And each year, as part of the forward program, mining companies are required to submit what we call a rehabilitation cost estimate. And that's submitted on the government's tool. We benchmark that every 4 years. We're at the back end of a process now where we're about to release a new rehabilitation cost estimate tool. And that process makes sure that the rates and activities are certainly consistent and up to date with what it's costing the industry to do. That security deposit, that's retained until successful rehabilitation is achieved. That way, we don't incur any financial liability should a company default on its obligations. But also what you'll see as progressive rehab occurs, companies can come to us with an application to reduce that security deposit once they demonstrate that rehabilitation obligation has been fulfilled. The big change for industry was a requirement to submit spatial data to us, and I'm going to demonstrate the mine rehab portal. So this one here is an industry-facing portal, and as I'll talk a little bit later, this also talks to the SEED portal, the Sharing, Enabling and Environmental Data, which is available to all the community to view. So as soon as data is submitted to this portal, it actually talks to the SEED portal. What I want to demonstrate here is that if you're flying over the Hunter Valley in a plane, this is what you see, and very hard to see any progressive rehabilitation here, because that's the whole point of rehabilitation. You shouldn't be able to see where mining is actually being. But now we have the ability to understand what the status of rehabilitation is for any given mining operation. So if I click on the annual submission data here, all of a sudden you can see, that should apply, is just loading at the moment. Rehabilitation is actually occurring. You can still see these lighter areas here is where active mining operations are occurring, but you can see rehabilitation being in behind the mining operation. And again, the rate of rehabilitation will be very different for a mining operation depending on its mine design. Mount Arthur, because it has a larger strike distance, because it's multi-seam operation, has a large area exposed, that they're required to manage those exposed areas under an environment protection license to minimise dust. But you can see Mangoola in this picture here, and you can see that because it's a shallow operation, rehabilitation is certainly closer in behind the mining operation. And as you'll hear from Sean Piggott a little bit later on in this webinar, this is Liddell coal operations. They're in an active closure phase, and you can see the various stages of rehabilitation, or phases of rehabilitation as we call it. So this is still active, which is where they're doing some backfilling at the moment. This is in the ecosystem establishment phases where they've just recently seeded. And these darker green areas here is through monitoring, they're being able to demonstrate that their target species are coming up, weeds are generally under control, and not a significant risk to achieving that final land use. It's essentially heading under its own steam towards achieving its final land use. And in these two areas here, this is where Glencore has come to the regulator with a lot of evidence to suggest that this area here has reached the final land use. And we've a very rigorous process we went through there to sign that, yes, we believe that in this area here, you've achieved the rehabilitation outcome documents for the site. And just to give understanding in terms of what else we see. So as part of a forward program, we see, essentially if I show the legend here, we can see the forecast disturbance areas about where mines are heading over the next number of years, but also see what's the forecast in terms of what they're looking to do from a rehabilitation perspective. Now if I just click off that for a second. The other thing we can see here is that once all mining has been done and dusted, this is what the final land use is going to look like for the Hunter Valley. You can see that native ecosystem areas, agricultural. You can see where the final voids are. And again, this is the process as mines are coming towards their end, where they see other potential opportunities, they would need to go through a development consent process, where there's the ability to retain certain infrastructure for the benefits of other alternative post-mining land uses. But now one of the big things here is that community can see this as well. So this is the seed portal, which is the government's overall resource for sharing spatial data that's collected across all government agencies. So if you go into the seed portal and type in mine rehabilitation, you can see all of the layers that I've just shown you as part of the mine rehabilitation portal. You can see where all of the project approval boundaries are, and if you go in close, you can see all of the mine names appear as well. So if you just see in terms of what we viewed in terms of the Liddell, you can see exact same layers that we went through on the mine rehab portal. So areas that are actively being filled at the moment, recently rehabbed areas, areas that are more mature, and the area that we signed off on last year. So just head back to the presentation. I've spoken to the sharing and enabling environmental data. In the back end of 2024, the resources regulator was subject to an audit via the New South Wales Audit Office, who looked at our overall compliance approach to mine rehabilitation. We're actively working on the recommendations of that report at the moment, which is principally around, again, improving the transparency around rehabilitation. So a lot of work we're doing at the moment is on the seed portal to give communities a lot more information about what they're looking at, what the data means, but also presenting data in terms of rehabilitation key performance indicators and understanding what that means as well. Our compliance and enforcement approach, the benefit of Schedule 8A has been is it's turned us from a reactive regulator into more of a proactive regulator. So the only thing we approve is outcomes, which is the outcome documents. We don't approve management plans anymore. Essentially what we do is we actually go out on the ground and test their effectiveness. And we do this through our target assessment programs, where we assess how companies are implementing critical controls to achieve successful rehabilitation. And we have a number of target assessment programs. So that's revegetation, landform establishment, decommissioning, material and soil management, surface and groundwater management, and tailing storage facilities management, where we'll do an absolute in-depth dive to look at the systems a mining company has in place, but also making sure those systems are being effectively implemented on the ground. So we want to see that we're getting effective rehabilitation. We also have effective programs around determining are companies rehabilitating as soon as reasonably practicable. So can we see that land's being shaped and revegetated right up and behind the mining operation as far as they can? Are studies underway to make sure that any knowledge gaps to rehabilitation have been effectively worked out, so we can prevent any lags once mining companies have finished their operation. In terms of regulatory tools, we essentially operate to what we call the compliance and enforcement pyramid. The base of that pyramid is really pushing self-regulation. The best effort we spend is really educating industry to make sure that they understand their obligations so they know how to fulfill it. And that's where we get the best outcomes. And we do that through news alerts, rehabilitation information releases. So where we go out and see some really good practice, we'll present that as a rehab information release so other mining companies can understand that, oh yeah, I've got some of these issues here, but we can see that this side is doing that over here. It's worked effectively for them, so we might actually adopt similar practices here. Equally, where we see poorer practices, we will publish those examples as well so that industry can understand what went wrong so they can prevent what's going wrong on their site. We also conduct a number of webinars. At the back end of our inspection programs through a target assessment program or an what we call a as soon as reasonably practicable inspection program, we will issue assessment finding letters at a very minimum. And companies are required to essentially submit back us action plans with nominated dates to address the findings and recommendations that we've put forward to. For more serious issues or where we identify a risk, and we really want to make sure that there's intervening actions put into place, we will issue statutory directions for companies to comply with. And some of those might be around rehabilitation enhancement programs where it may be to fix up a landform that may be unstable, or to address some revegetation that target species, for example, are not coming up, or weeds might be a bit of an issue, just for an example. And then the more pointy end of the pyramid, once we've actually gone through that base, is more of the heavier compliance work, where for more companies who are not willing to comply issue fines, prosecutions, suspensions, cancellations. But I must say, in the large part, industry do comply very well with our obligations, and there's some really good performers across the board. But we do like to take that escalated enforcement approach. So just to really finish off my presentation, to give everybody a bit of an understanding of the scale of operations. And when you're driving through the Hunter Valley, I know, certainly feedback that I've had from a number of community members is that, how can you rehabilitate something like that? The sheer scale is mind-boggling. But, you stand next to some of these trucks, and they are quite big. But with the scale of it, it enables them to move dirt very, very quickly. So something that looks like this ends up looking something like that, and enables them to start to return the land to what the nominated post-mining land use here. And in this instance here, it's a bit of a mixture of native ecosystems and agricultural activities. And as Sean is about to get into as well, this is now looking across the rehabilitated tailings dam across Liddell. And certainly you can start to pick up here the more natural looking landscapes. We're getting the rolling hills as opposed to the flat tops and the steep sides, which was more of an era generated from the 90s and early 2000s. Now we can see more modern landform designs that certainly match in with what is the natural topography of the area. Any questions?
Thanks, Matt. We might hold questions to the end.
Sure.
We'll just let Sean and Paul get through their presentation. But thank you very much for that presentation. That was certainly a very comprehensive overview of the regulatory framework and your approach. And it was also great to see the sort of rehab, that visual representation of rehab through the seed portal. And I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at that resource after this presentation. So I might hand over now to Sean and Paul to take us through their presentation. I understand you've had a bit of a technical issue there. We've got a blackout at Liddell at the moment, despite being so close to the power station. So hopefully there's no technical issues, but I'll hand over to Sean and Paul.
Thanks. Yeah, we do have a blackout at the moment. We're on laptops. We've got a few, so hopefully we can jump across and get through this. But if we disappear for a minute, we'll be back. So I'll just quickly share my screen. Which I do like this. All right. Is that coming through okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so my name's Sean Piggott, E&C manager here at Liddell. I've got Paul Amby in the room with us, and I'll just give a bit of an overview of the Liddell closure project. So just quickly, a little bit of history of Liddell, what the mining operation was and still is to this date, and a bit of update on how we go about rehab planning and implementation, an overview of the closure works occurring at site here, and then finally a bit of around the completion criteria and certification that Matt touched on, and where we're at in that phase as well. So Liddell was first mined way back in 1923. as a small underground operation, really kicked off sort of up post World War II in the 1940s as an underground operation, and it's really sort of been continuously mined since about then. There's been a bunch of different open cut and underground operations over the years, including some old open cuts back in the 60s and 70s. But I guess Liddell open cut, as it was at the end, really commenced back in 1990. The underground operation finished in the mid-90s, and then we transitioned to a Xstrata at the time, but Glencore managed and operated pit back in 2010. And then we finished the open cut mining a couple of years ago now, back in 2023. So, yeah, about 100 years of mining all up. As you can see in that top photo, plenty of different underground workings. We've got the railway that runs through the middle. Lots of open cut. The whole area has basically been mined. So a lot of mining over the 100 years, and a lot of work to rehab at the end of the day. So I'm just missing a page there, and it's gone back to front. So I guess this is just an overview. So that photo on the right's from the old underground days back in the 70s and 80s, and then fast forward, 30 years, and we actually went through and mined through some of those underground workings as we did the open cut operations. So, like I said, 2023 was the end of mining. So in the South Pit, which is the main pit on the western side of the railway, back in February, and then last coal was mid-July 2023. We continued to process the coal, wash and load trains for another few months up until mid-November. And then post that date, the Liddell Coal Closure Project team formally took control of the site. So just as we transitioned to closure, the majority of the workers were redeployed to other sites or took a voluntary redundancy, and then a handful of us actually stayed on for the closure project to see that execution. So from a planning point of view, I guess it all comes back to what our environmental approvals are about. So our latest modification, Mod 8, back in 2023. This is the final landform, so this is what we're working at. So it's grazing sort of in the northern and on top of the dumps, with habitat corridors of native central box ironbark woodland, sort of down around the edges, and provide that habitat corridors between the valley floor up into the mountains, and then back along to Bowman's Creek as well. So the final landform, all the later stuff is all, as Matt was talking about, the geofluve natural landform, which incorporates that microrelief, and we take action and plans to divert as much water away from those main final voids as we can, and with a plan in the long run to prove that water is clean, and then eventually release it back to the environment.
Just a point there, Sean, and I'm good at interrupting, sorry mate, but it's just worth pointing out to everyone that, there's a lot of talk about alternate final land use at the moment. But for the majority of our sites, and obviously Glencore's only one company in the Hunter Valley, there is an approved final outcome, and as Sean's just explained, that's predominantly a woodland outcome and also some grazing. So there is a lot of talk about it, but I just wanted to make the point that it's not a blank canvas. We can't turn all these sites into water slide parks or whatever fancy ideas people come up with. So we are working towards that plan, and that's really our objective, is delivering on that obligation. So, sorry, Matt.
Yeah. So from an infrastructure point of view, like to say, our approved plan is to remove all infrastructure, which is the wash plant, the office building, and the workshops, the MIA, and also a large rail crossing that runs across the railway between the two pits. Now, final voids are approved to remain. So we've got high walls and low walls there that are going to be, the low walls will be shaped down to a stable slope, and the high walls will all be stable and treated to provide public safety measures into the future. The South Pit is approved just to be used for tailings emplacement by other Glencore operations, and the entrance pit will store water. So all the modelling indicates that the water level will remain well below the spill level, and there'll just be a groundwater sink into the future. Just from a planning and integration into site processes, so I guess rehab is a key part of that mine planning process, during operations and obviously now into closure. from those higher level life of mine plans, your annual budgeting, which looks forward 5 years and plans those the rehab areas, and right down to your weekly, your monthly, your daily plans, which are some examples on the right there. So, it really is working with the mine planners and the operators to get those dumps designed and included in the mine plan. Obviously, we progressively rehab the site to reduce costs, and it also, as Matt indicated, is required of us. So we do that. We achieve our targets incrementally, so we're not waiting till mine closure at the end of the day to do these big items. We optimize the landform design, and that's around lowering cost and making our workload as low as we can. So we put the dirt where it needs to be to minimise shaping. And we go along and we try and reduce those liabilities, so the RCE, by capping tailings dams when they're able, removing infrastructure when it becomes redundant, and those sorts of things. And then obviously we've got our annual rehab and closure plans, which are prepared in line with all our approval requirements and are signed off from a site and corporate level each year. When we move into that mine closure phase, we kick off that detailed closure planning phase, process. And we go through sort of a 4-phase approach where, the first approach, which is at least 5 years, if not more, before the end of mine life, we do a bit of a knowledge-based assessment, which is around, what do we know, what do we not know? We do risk assessments, we develop obligation registers, we work through all different, technical, all the aspects, and identify where there are knowledge gaps, where those key risks are, and then what constraints we have, and we risk assess those out, way back, 5+ years ago. Then as out of those initial assessments and those risk assessments, we kind of work on those areas that are higher risk or where we have those knowledge gaps, and we engage environmental consultants or engineers or whatever it may be to undertake those next detailed studies and technical studies, all things water, geochem, landform stability, landform designs, demolition experts, tailings capping, land contamination, or everything we can go through. We've got a big list that we tick off and make sure we address. And then again, through that, we'll hold another risk assessment and see where we're at, and then further actions get drawn out of that. Then once we've really got a hand around it, we really start scoping what those works are, and that's really around that whole project, getting a project in place similar to any other sort of mining or construction project, and resourcing, time, budgeting, and all those sorts of things. So we split it down by domain, which we'll run through in a minute, to really focus those areas on each spatially and activity-based domain. We develop scope of works, detailed scope of works for each of those domains. There may be multiple scopes of works for each domain, depending on the complexity in there. And then quantities are estimated, and that can then feed into costs and engineering plans for that. And then I guess we get to the end of mine life, and even before, really, we're executing tailings capping and things before we actually finish mining coal in most instances. But at that point, we have a detailed mine closure plan in place. It's based from our point of view on the Glencore mine closure planning protocol. All that relevant information is then fed into our rehabilitation management plan, which is up on our website and available for anyone to have a look at and see what we've got planned and how we're executing them. And we go through the tendering, contracting phase, and then we go through and we execute those works. And then we allow for a significant period at the post execution, at least sort of 15 years of monitoring, maintenance, and getting that to a point where we can sign off on the completion criteria and get that land certified. The other key annual or more than annual activity is around the monitoring and maintenance. So we do at least annual monitoring. So here at Liddell and across all Glencore sites, which is a walkover where a suitable consultant will physically walk across all the rehab on site at least once a year and identify things like erosion, any weeds, bare ground, any other issues that we identify. There's the scientific plot-based and transect-based vegetation monitoring and agricultural vegetation monitoring. And then there's a bunch of other monitoring like geotechnical, water monitoring, all those other aspects get picked up as well. Glencore's developed a rehab report card, which is down in the bottom there. So it's a way to get a bit of a snapshot of all the rehab, not just at Liddell, but across sites. So it'll categorise it as acceptable. So the green areas there are acceptable, which effectively means they're meeting criteria and they're good to sign off. The monitor, so that's the stuff that's trending towards meeting the criteria and there's no real issues there. So let's just monitor for a few more years and wait for, whether it's a species to reach maturity or whatever that may be. There's some maintenance activities. A lot of that's really generally around weeds and sometimes erosion. And then there is a rework category, which there's none at Liddell, but that's if major failures or for whatever reason something hasn't gone right and it actually needs to be reworked. So Glencore can take a snapshot of that across all operations and have a look at that. And for us at Liddell, it really, it helps us focus on what's ready to certify, where we need to focus our maintenance activities. And we've got a detailed schedule that's prepared annually, budgeted for, and then implemented on an annual basis.
We might just talk there, Sean, about the timeframes, and you've probably got it in your next slide, knowing my luck. But it's important for people to understand that once the seed goes in the ground, then it's actually claimed as being rehabilitated in accordance with internal and external definitions. But that can take 20 years to then certify. We've recently had some areas certified that were probably 15 years old or something like that, and that's been the case at a couple of sites in New South Wales. But it's important to understand those timeframes, because even though we finished here in 2023, we're probably adding on another 15 years at least to achieve those final outcomes, and that takes some time and obviously some money. That dashboard there, though, is important because it's changed our focus. Our focus used to be on getting that seed in the ground, and it's certainly not a set and forget. It's really driven a focus around maintenance. And there's obviously KPIs around this stuff too, and we really drive the sites, all of our sites, not just Liddell, to focus on those maintenance activities, as Sean said, mainly weeds and erosion, because what it does is reduces the time that it takes to actually achieve that completion criteria. So we're seeing some improvement across our group through using that simple dashboard system. It's for simple people like me. Instead of reading big, thick yellow pages, I'm just showing my age there, of ecological reports, it's a quick snapshot of how that rehab's performing. So it's been quite an effective tool.
So just a bit of an update of the closure project and where we're at and what we've been doing. So the closure project itself, so at the end of 2023, when the project commenced, there'd been just over 1,061 hectares of rehab completed against 1,644 hectares of total disturbance. And Matt mentioned, as soon as reasonably practical rehab, and really at the end of mine life, there was almost nothing available to rehab. Anything that wasn't rehab was actively being mined, actively dumped, or was tailings in placement areas that was unable to be capped. So we commenced, like we said, back in 2024 officially. We took control in November, but the project works sort of commenced in 2024 and will run for around about 4 years. So we're currently forecast sort of the back end of 2027 to be completed. The project itself would deliver around 350 hectares of rehab, and that remaining couple of hundred hectares is really around the voids and their ongoing use as either tailings or water storage, which will eventually be rehabilitated, but will be done in the future. So I guess just what our works involve is decommissioning and demolition of all the existing fixed infrastructure, so the wash plant, the mine infrastructure area, so the offices and workshops, and also that large rail bridge I mentioned. Disposing of all the mobile fleet. So anything we sold off the majority of our fleet. Anything that's got no value or no interest, we will scrap it and dispose of and recycle. We bulk push all the unshaped overburden dumps, cap all the tailings dams. So we treat the final void high wall. So that's around bunds and fencing and making sure it's safe and stable and protects the public into the future. Landform, so final shaping, revegetation, drainage works, and then ongoing monitoring and maintenance, and also the whole site water management. So there's going to be a period post completion while we prove that the water quality is good enough to be released back off site. So setting up some pumps and pipes and things just to maintain that for that period until we're satisfied and can release that off site. That plan on the right just breaks down the domain. So I mentioned before, part of our closure planning is really we break it down by a domain point from a scope of works and a budgeting point of view to spatially and activity-based areas. So, different domains for infrastructure areas, each pit, the final voids, the different voids and tailings dams all have different domains because they get treated differently, even though a tailings dam's a tailings dam. Everyone has their own challenges and requirements. So we break them down, pull them apart. Where we can, we'll combine them into a bigger contract, a bigger project, but really we need to focus on each area to make sure we get the right plans and budgets in place. So just some photos here. So these are the two low walls in the entrance pit. So the one on the left is the northern side and the one on the south is the Bayswater or the southern low wall. So these works commenced back in August 2024. So just under 12 months of work there, over 3 million cubic meters of bulk push there. So the bulk push is now complete. So all the loose overburden material is shaped down to a stable landform and is now in the process of being. You can see on the right there the rock drains and the drainage lines are being put in. Bit of final trim there, then we'll revegetate that later this year. Same with the left, so we'll work on that, get all the rock drains, and then revegetate that later on. These here are the two of our tailings dams. So you've got Reservoir West and Reservoir South on the right there. So Res West, we're at 65% capped. Res South is about 75% complete. They're just on hold, these two areas at the moment, just due to some low tailing strength due to all the wet weather we had, but we'll look to commence that back up in early next year. As you can see, while we're not capping the tailings dam, we've pretty well completed all the rehab around the overburden dumps and areas that aren't directly on top of the tailings. So we've completed, about 70-80% of all the rehab in this area, and we'll cap that off and finalise that rehab, hopefully sort of mid to late next year. These two here, so the one on the left, Dam 17, is a former mine void that was a key water storage during operation. So it was our key transfer dams. They're all water from the pit and underground workings was initially pumped into here and then picked up and sent around site for usage. It's been shaped down. The void's been more or less filled in with a small water body just to maintain that mainly to contain water during the rehabilitation phase. And then that will eventually be a spillway will be constructed and that water will run back into Bowman's Creek. That's drainage lines are done. We're just topsoiling that as we speak to aim to rehab that in the next couple of weeks. And on the right, there's an old dragline pit that's right down near Bowman's Creek that was mined in the 60s or 70s called Dam 1. It's a fairly good quality water source that we've used over the years, and we made the decision to maintain that water body, shape the old dragline spools around the edges, and then rehabilitate that. So that work's been completed. As you can see there, it's starting to green up on the left and just been seeded the area on the right, but it's all come along really well. On the left there, that's our old ROM pad. So we're planning to commence demolition early next year of the prep plant. So part of that is removing all the carbonaceous materials, all the old bedding coal from that area, and that's all disposed of underneath into the pit or underneath dumps where we can get sufficient cover over the top of that. So that's all. Those works were completed sort of mid this year. And on the right there is our third and final tailings dam to be capped, or fourth to be capped, and that's Durham. So that's about 25% complete. And likewise, due to some low strengths, we just pause that at the moment and looking to commence that early next year. On the left there, so Matt had a photo of this. That's the Antine tailings dam. So that was completed back in 2023. There's the former void there. So that on the right there, that body of water, what we call Dam 4, former old mining void that's filling up with water. It's pretty good quality water. It's comparable to what's in the creek, just all completely contained from those rehabilitated slopes. So it's looking really good. We're actually in the process now of finalising a plan to install some infrastructure, so some fencing, some water troughs onto that land, and we're actually going to start grazing that former tailings dam hopefully early next year. So it's all coming along really well. And that final photo on the right there is the old Res North. So Res North was an old void that was used as the main water storage on site. It was used to feed not only Liddell's prep plant, but also as a key transfer point between Mount Owen, Liddell and Ravensworth. It's been dewatered, treated, and some long-term drainage and overflow channels have been constructed with shaping of some steep overburden that was in that area as well. And then finally, just on our criteria and certification and where we're up to. So we actually had our criteria, our first tranche of rehab criteria approved back in mid-2024. I think, Matt, we were the first to do so under the new reforms. The majority of those were approved, so all things around infrastructure, agricultural areas, ecological vegetation, stability and things like that. And there are a few that are marked as further refinement required. So these are some of the longer term issues around surface and groundwater. So we're just finalising some detailed modelling of surface and groundwater impacts to develop a bit of a closure water management plan. As part of that, we'll develop these criteria, which will then be consulted with the resource regulator, with planning, and with the EPA. High risk landform. So we're talking high walls and steep slopes there. So we're working through that. That's a bit of a new area for us, and working through what that criteria will look like and undertaking some pretty detailed geotechnical assessments of all the high walls and steep slopes around site, and look to include some LEM modelling type work where required for around those high risk erosion areas. Tailings capping. So just what specifically that criteria in tailings, both capping it and then longer term performance of those tailings dams will look like. And we've pretty well drafted those to be consulted in the near future. And then also just a little bit around ecosystem resilience and soil health. So I think we've got some draft ones for those as well to submit.
Sean, just probably want to provide some context there. So Paul mentioned a bit earlier that final rehab certification here is not going to be until 15, 20 years. It's important that we have processes that make sure that appropriate studies going in to set the right benchmarks. So the ones that require further refinement, we're comfortable with the fact that Liddell's got some pretty detailed closure studies underway to come up with that answer, so that once when we know that that's going to be stable in the long term. So under a previous mining operations process, where mining operations plan process, we didn't have that luxury of being able to have the time to be able to approve that completion criteria at that right level. So this is one of the benefits of Schedule 8A. But it's something that we continue to work with industry. We're about to republish our rehab objectives and completion criteria guideline, just with some further work that we've done with geotechnical experts, for example, ecological experts. So industry has got that information that they need to be able to set the right criteria for us to approve and be comfortable with.
Thanks, Matt. And then certification. So again, we mentioned earlier, we had 52 hectares of pasture rehab certified back in August last year. So that was area that was, like we said, about 10 to 15 years old, seeded between 2010 and 2013 over a few different areas, and we've grazed that area sustainably since at least 2015, 2016. So and we still do to this day. We've still got we've had our second round of carving on site up in these areas, so it's working quite well and successfully. And the monitoring over that place has taken place over that sort of that 10 to 15 year period as well. We engage an agronomist, an independent agronomist, who comes in and on a quarterly basis and monitors and provides advice. So a fairly detailed report and data was used to support that certification application.
Again, as a regulator, that's the type of information that we rely on to be able to sign off. And we also have the ability to be able to get peer review experts in as well, to assist us in our decision making as to whether that rehab is successful or not. But with Liddell, substantial amount of monitoring data over a number of years, and agronomist reports that really enable us to be very comfortable that that pasture and that regime was going to be sustainable in the long term.
And then finally, so on the back of that, working through that process with Matt and his team around getting that area certified, our latest round of monitoring has identified a lot more areas, as you can see in the green on the right there, that we're just working to finalise our next application. So we've been collecting data like we had with all the others. We were supposed to have our agronomist on site today, actually, but he cancelled this morning to just do his final inspection and do that report. So we're hoping to get that submitted sort of later this year. And we're just finalising the area, exactly what it is, but it's probably going to be around that 80 hectare sort of mark, another 80 odd hectares of rehab. We're just working on final paddock boundaries and incorporating tree screens and things in there. But once we finalise that, we'll get that submitted. And that's it. And my battery is just about to die, but I think I just made it. So I don't know.
Thanks very much, Sean. Really appreciate that presentation, and Paul as well. Hopefully you guys have got another couple of minutes of battery left and we can get to a couple of questions. I realise we're running quite close to the scheduled end time, but we might run over by a few minutes just so we can deal with the questions that we've got. And we've got one popped up in the chat, which I think is probably addressed to Matt. But if anyone has any other questions, you can use the React button down at the bottom of the screen to just indicate that you'd like to ask a question, and I'll come to you shortly. But the question here from Will Rifkin is, Matt, what mechanisms are being used to address possible cumulative effects and joint opportunities?
I might answer this in two parts. So primarily when a company is coming up with their final land use as part of a development consent for either a modification to a mining operation or a new mining operation, particularly in the Hunter Valley, they're required to consider how's their rehab strategy fit in with neighbouring mines. So I showed a little bit earlier how the final land use across the Hunter Valley, you can see all of the corridors linking up. That's an important part in terms of looking at that cumulative impact. In terms of post-mining land use, again, New South Wales Resources has just commissioned the Future Jobs and Investment Authority. That's still emerging in terms of its role and function, but I see one of the key things there is potentially looking at facilitating some of those cumulative opportunities post-closure. And again, there'll be opportunities for communities to participate in that process where that kind of comes through a development consent process, for example, as to what's perceived for this mining operation in the long term.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And we'll certainly be looking to connect with the Future Jobs and Investment Authority through the dialogue and share that with our members as well, so that they understand their function and role when they are established. We've had another one come through from Amy Shah. Is the primary post-mining land use and operations focused on revegetation and grazing, or are alternative uses like industrial projects like renewable energy and generation being actively explored? Maybe Paul, did you want to?
Yeah, for sure, James. As I said, obviously our approved final outcome is around that revegetation. So that's the primary focus for a company like Glencore. It's not to rule any other options out, but if you do want to look at other options, obviously you have to go through a separate approval process. And look, there are other sites around the valley. Mount Arthur's looking into alternate final land use with power and different things like that. And I think Muswellbrook Coal. I'm sorry, I'm not across all of them, obviously, but primarily for us, it is about delivering that revegetation outcome. But it's not to preclude anything into the future. But our focus for the moment is to deliver on what that original approval was for.
Yeah, I think that's why we focus on that whole safe, sustainable, stable landform. So I guess it doesn't preclude anything in the future. We don't have approval to do it, but by removing all contamination, making the landform as stable and as sustainable as possible.
Thank you, Matt. Did you want to talk to that as well?
Yeah, I was going to say there are mines.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we
Sorry,
can.
we did lose Sean there, I think.
We can't hear you guys. Hang on.
We'll
I've
just-
got
we'll
you
just-
now. I've got you now. We're good to go. Sorry, we switch over to my computer. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if you got the end of that, but yeah. Hopefully
we
that
did.
is the
We did.
question.
Yeah, what I was going to say, there's certainly other mines that we have across the state. So, for example, in the Sydney area, where their post-mining land uses has been identified for other purposes. So, we have had a number of quarry sites in Sydney areas have gone back to industrial facilities. Have lent themselves quite nicely to that. So, it really comes down to the context of the site and what opportunities, what demand there is for post-mining land uses. And as Paul said earlier, there's certainly mines quite closer to Muswellbrook or closer to Singleton that may lend themselves more to those opportunities. But it's really a case-by-case basis. But our framework is very flexible. So where a consent is modified to enable another post-mining land use, certainly the rehab outcomes can be adjusted accordingly.
Thanks, Matt. And there are some other examples in the Hunter, of course, with the Black Rock Motorsport Park being one that's been well publicised about alternative land uses there. Are there any other questions from anyone on the call?
There's a question there, James, about the...
Oh, sorry, I missed that one. What's the area of the current Liddell site was originally part of the Lake Liddell recreational area? From Sophie Nichols, what area of the current Liddell site was originally part of the Lake Liddell recreational area?
To be honest, I don't think any. The current one is, and Lake Liddell is associated with the Liddell Power Station, not the Liddell coal mine. As far as I'm aware, there's none. We are separate. We do support have many years during operation support the recreation area, but I'm not aware that any of it was formerly on the Liddell lease area.
Thanks, Sean. There's one other one that's popped in. Are there any regulatory hurdles that exist when proposing non-traditional land uses? Maybe Paul and Matt. Matt, you've just mentioned that there's quite a flexible regulatory framework from the resources regulators end, but maybe Paul, do you want to talk to the planning side of things?
Yeah, look, I think the main thing I'd talk about to make people aware of is the ongoing obligations around the mining title. If you're the last leaseholder and then you're wanting to transition to something else, you're responsible in perpetuity for any mining related impacts on that mining title. And Matt might want to talk about that, but I would probably see that as much as there is flexibility, as Matt discussed, it is a bit of a hurdle because it detracts from the property developer looking at that site. We'd obviously like to sell the site as a whole unit if we could at some stage down the track once we've met the criteria. But if you're saying to the developer you're going to take on the mining title, then it's obviously not a very attractive option. So there is a few hurdles, nothing that can't be overcome. I think it's important to point out, though, the time frames. These things don't happen quickly. James, you mentioned Black Rock Motorsport Park. I'm going to say that kicked off in 2018, so 7 years before they turned to sort of soil on the actual motorsport park. So it's not short time frames to make these transitions, not to say that it can't happen, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, all these new or new land uses need to go through the planning process, of course, which can take some time. Matt, did you want to speak to that as well?
Yeah, it's all doable, I guess, is probably a key message I want to get across. So, we've had case studies where, for example, Maxwell Solar Farm, it's looking to establish a solar farm over, rehabilitated overburden placement areas. When you look at the current mining obligations on that was to get back to a more of an agricultural outcome on that one there. But when the Maxwell project was going through, we were keen to make sure that that project in itself was, designed to be able to take care of some of those, risk issues that are associated with the former mining operation. And then, so for example, the Maxwell Solar Farm has a development consent condition around weed management. So that's probably the key risk from a former mining operation. We can actually see that that's going to be managed through that other operation, which means we can actually carve that out and that gets regulated under that process. Similar with the Muswellbrook Coal, who are looking at pumped hydro. You know, we had a pretty big input into the planning approval process, where we identified that, well, if you're looking to utilise it for this purpose, then the project would need to be designed to account for some of the risks from previous mining operations. And you know, where we can see that project will kick off and be designed to address those constraints, then we can see that will be managed under a separate or regulated under a separate process, and that's a way to extract from the mining process. So, you know, they're very high level examples, but certainly doable. And I think as this post-mining land use process evolves over the next few years, that'll become a lot clearer in terms of how that can be navigated.
Thanks, Matt.
Probably, James, just worth adding for people's info, obviously there was a Senate inquiry into post-mining land use, alternate post-mining land use, and there's now a working group that's got 2 case studies, one being the West Walls End site down near Lake Macquarie, and the other one being Mount Arthur. So I think there's, you know, some federal funding towards, you know, assessing the potential of those sites. So that's occurring as we speak. So it's definitely the momentum is building, which is good to see.
But just final thing I'd say, this is not new. So you look at a lot of the former mining operations, and you probably don't even realise it, but you know, if you look down the southern end of Lake Macquarie, you've got Rose Corp, who's built a whole residential subdivision over what was Lake Coal's operations. You know, you look at Black Butt Reserve. That's the only bit of native stand left in the Newcastle area, but that was all associated with former underground mine workings. But the pit top facilities have been turned in as part of the recreational area, as part of Black Butt Reserve. So there are a number of examples across the state where mining has transitioned to post-mining land uses. Always not visible, but that's a good thing. But I think there's certainly in the Upper Hunter Valley, I think it's starting to evolve.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks, Matt. And some good couple of local case studies there to demonstrate what that looks like. It is 1:10 now, so we've gone a little bit over, so I might wrap that up. But if anyone has any other questions, please don't hesitate to email them through to us, and we will get those answered for you. But thank you all for joining in today, and a big thank you to our speakers for their wonderful presentations. Very informative and really good information for the community as well. As I mentioned earlier, we will be uploading this recording onto the Dialogues website, and also if you've got and the presentations as well from today. If you've got any feedback or questions, or if you've got any suggestions on future webinar topics, please get in touch with us, either Lisa or myself, and we'll be happy to talk to you. So thanks everyone, and we'll wrap that up. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.